A very good morning, the session chairman for today, Honorable CA Pramod Kumar ji, session moderator CA Rashmin Sanghvi from Bombay, the esteemed panelists for today, CA TP Oswal from Bombay and Shri Rashmi Rajan Das, the IRS Joint Secretary CBDT, Dr. Rakesh Gupta, Delhi, CA Manish Ghadia, the chairman for WRC, CA Drashti Desai in absence, the vice chairman for WRC, chairman Ahmedabad branch CA Harit Dhariwal, vice chairman CA Bhishan Shah, the treasurer and chairman for the Direct Tax Committee CA Sunil Sanghvi, senior members and my dear friends. A very, very warm good morning for the last day for this wonderful national conference on Direct Taxes 2021. We hope that yesterday's two sessions were amazing, and today we are going to have a wonderful brainstorming session with Honorable Pramod Kumarji and our esteemed panelists. So let's start the day. We begin the session as per our rich tradition with ICI motto. I request each one of you to place your right hand on your heart for ICI motto.
Yaesha supteshu jagrati, Yaesha supteshu jagrati, Kamam 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 nirmimanaha tadeva shukrada brahma tadeva amritamuchyate tasmin lokah shataha sarve tadunat kaschan etadvaita
Welcome back. We are thankful to each and every participant who have always encouraged Ahmedabad branch to organize such kind of conferences. And also we are thankful to those who are new to Ahmedabad branch. We have received registration of more than 600 participants. And yes, since it's Sunday morning, 200 people have already joined and we are waiting for others to join. With this, I would now request first Chairman of Ahmedabad branch, CA Harit Dhariwal, to give his address.
Thank you, Anjali Ben. Very respected Vice President of ITAT, C. Pramod Kumarji, the Joint Secretary at CBDT, Rashmi Ranjan Das ji, the Session Moderator, CA Rashmin Sanghvi sir, CA TP Oswal sir, CA Manish Ghadia, Chairman of WRC, Bhishan Bhai, our Vice Chairman, Anjali Ben Secretary, Sunil Bhai Treasurer, and the team Ahmedabad branch who have joined us, and all the participants. A very good morning to all of you, and welcome to the day 3 of this national conference. And I'm sure after a wonderful feedback that we have got for the first 2 days, today is going to be even better day. And I'll tell you that because the esteemed panelists and the session chairman and our moderator that we see on the screen right now, they are the best in their fields. And I'm so happy to share with you that I was very lucky to see how they have developed the entire session. You know, they had a lot of email interactions, a lot of sessions exchange, and plus yesterday they also had a session wherein they discussed what to deliberate with all of you. So the kind of work that they have done, I'm sure it's going to be one of the most enriching sessions on digital taxation. And first of all, I would like to thank CA Rashmin Sanghvi sir for taking up this task of moderating and guiding us and first of its kind brain trust on digital taxation. Thank you so much, sir, for that. And to all the other panelists, sir, Pramod Kumarji sir, thank you so much for always being there for us at Ahmedabad branch. TP Oswal sir, we are very lucky to have you today, sir, as one of our panelists. And Rashmi Ranjan Das ji for again guiding us today for a wonderful session. We are looking forward to hear from you also. And very happy to see CA Manish Ghadia, who is the chairman of our region, WRC, who has joined us today for a special address. Sir, thank you for sparing the time today morning. You are at Daman, but I'm so happy to see you and have your session for 5 minutes. And thanks to all the participants for making this conference such a unique and such a good experience for all of us. and I'm sure it's going to be a great day ahead. So thank you so much. I would now request CA Manish Gadia to please address all of us.
Good morning, all of you. CA Pramod Kumar sir, Vice Chairman, Vice President ITAT, Shri Rashmi Ranjan Das, IRS Joint Secretary FT and TR1 CBDT, Rashmi Sanghvi ji, TP Oswal ji, Harit Dhariwal, Chairman Ahmedabad branch, and entire team and dear participants. Good morning to all of you, and it's really indeed a pleasure always to be at Ahmedabad. I should say one of the best and vibrant branch of our region, and they will always come out with some unique thing. Like today we are going to have a discussion, panel discussion on digital taxation. Probably maybe the first time we are having this kind of panel discussion, at least in our region, what I can say. Prior to that, Movement 73, Fit 73, and all this initiative, and parallelly the tracking is also going on by the Ahmedabad Vikasa at Saputara. So a lot of activities are going on. So really hats off to Chairman Harit for doing this fantastic job. I will not take much time. I will not discuss on topic because all the stalwarts of direct taxation are here in this panel. So it's not appropriate for me to talk on this subject. But only one initiative I will tell you about what WIRC has taken. There are various initiatives, but I will discuss only one initiative that we have received various suggestions, various problems, whatever members are facing. So the one problem is that they are not getting a proper article, proper main force to do the work at the office. And since pandemic exams are going, less number of students are attending, so there is a lesser number of articles flowing in the system. So WIRC has started a new initiative called TEL, that is Train, Earn and Learn, where we are training a college student, undergraduate student who are not pursuing CA, so that they will be ready to work with the CA firm. And once they are ready, we are offering a training with the CA firm for 1 year. And they will not be an employee, they will be a trainee of the CA firm, where we expect that the CA should encourage them to join CA course, as well as to give a proper training so that their future can be secured and they can learn various things. So Ahmedabad branch also is going to launch this initiative very soon. So those members who are interested in hiring this kind of trainee can approach Ahmedabad branch for this. So thank you very much. Over to you, Anjali madam.
Thank you, Manishji. It has been for the first time that we are seeing such rich programs being organized by WRC. And yes, under your dynamic leadership and with the support, Ahmedabad branch too will support every initiative of WRC. Taking the session ahead, since everybody is curious to listen to the esteemed panelists, let's start the session. We'll request CA Sunil Sanghvi to first introduce the Honorable Chairman of CA Pramod Kumar ji.
You need to unmute.
Thank you, Anjali ma'am. Welcome all the dignitaries on the dais and participants. Welcome to the day 3 of the National Conference. I am pleased to introduce Sri Pramod Kumar ji, Honorable Vice President, ITAT, Mumbai. Sir was born in November 1960 at Vadodara. Sir belongs to Gujarat and a qualified chartered accountant, and is an accountant member, as I told, in the ITAT, and has been posted at various benches across the India, including Kolkata, Mumbai, Pune, Agra, and Ahmedabad. He has also worked as a visiting member on division and special benches at New Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, Chandigarh, Amritsar, Jabalpur, Cuttack, Lucknow, and Guwahati benches, etc. Sir is having experienced more than 18 years as a member of the ITAT, and he has authored more than 10,000 judgments covering many nuances of the income tax law, including the areas of the international taxation and transfer pricing. Prior to joining ITAT in the year 2000, Sir has practiced as a chartered accountant for around 15 years at New Delhi. He has also worked as a United Nations Development Program in South, sharing of successful tax practice. He has been on the board of editors of Asia Pacific Tax Bulletin, published by the IBFD Amsterdam. He has also been on the board of the directors of the International Taxation of Tax Judges set up by the Tax Court of Canada. And he has worked in the capacity development in various parts of the world. Sir is a well-known name for his pioneering work done in the areas of the international taxation. With this brief introduction, we welcome you, sir, and let's have a big round of applause for the sir. Over to you, Anjali bhai.
Thank you, Sunil bhai. It is always an honor to have Pramod Kumar ji associated with Ahmedabad branch. I would now request CA Bhishan Shah to introduce the first panelist, TP Oswal ji from Bombay.
Good morning, all the stalwarts, respected members. It's pleasure to introduce learned TP Oswal sir. As we all aware that sun in the sky doesn't require any introduction. TP sir doesn't require any introduction, but for many of young chartered accountants, it is better to know him. And for that, his introduction will send in the chat box so they can able to understand, because if I try to read it, it will take much longer time, and we all want to hear all the panelists. And as ICAI has started finance and literacy drive, sir makes all of us literate in taxation since 1978. His actions speaks louder than the words. So we welcome sir, and floor is yours, Anjali again.
Thank you, Bhishan bhai. You are truly correct. Our esteemed panelist does not need any introduction, but as a matter of courtesy and love for them, I would now request CA Sunil Sanghvi to introduce Rashmi Rajan Das and CA Rashmi Sanghvi.
Thank you, Anjali ma'am. Sri Rashmi Ranjan Das ji sir originally belonged to Odisha and is an IRS officer and also a joint secretary in the Ministry of Finance, and is amongst a distinguished group of 25 tax experts from around the world appointed as a member of the UN Tax Committee for the current year, that is a 2021 to 2025 term. Sir is working as a joint secretary, FT and TR1 CBDT Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance. Sir has around 28 years of experience as a member of IRS in policy making and implementing direct tax laws in India. Since 2018, he is an Indian delegate to Inclusive Framework, a group of more than 135 countries monitoring BEPS. Also, sir is an Indian delegate since 2016 to OECD's Task Force on the Digital Economy, that is TFDE, and a member of TFD Bureau also. Sir holds a postgraduate diploma in public policy and management from IIM Bangalore 2010 and a postgraduate degree in international relations from GNU New Delhi 1990. He has written and published articles on various value creation and its relevance for the allocation of taxing rights and on whether arm's length principle is losing its authority. We welcome you, sir, and let's have a big round of applause for the Das sir also. And now the next, our moderator, CA Rasmin Bhai Sanghvi, who has helped us a lot for designing this program. CA Rasmin Bhai Sanghvi, partner in the Rasmin Sanghvi and Associates Mumbai, and is practicing in Mumbai since 1975. Sir has a mainly interest in the international taxation, FEMA, international economics. Sir has made presentation at various conferences organized by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, BCAS, Chamber of Tax Consultant, Income Tax Department conferences, and several other institutions on cross-border collaborations, international taxation, FEMA, investment, and international economics. He was appointed by the CBDT on the e-commerce committee in the year 1999 and again appointed in the new e-commerce committee in the year 2015. This committee drafted the report of the equalization levy as e-commerce tax, which was imposed in the Finance Act 2016. A book on digital taxation written by all the three partners as published in the year 2019 by the Taxman. With this brief introduction, we welcome you, sir. And let's have a big round of applause for the sir also. Very first time we are seeing all the experts on at Ahmedabad branch, and we all the members of the Ahmedabad branch will be benefited by you all the sir. Thank you once again, sir, and over to you, Anjali.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sunil Bhai. I think with the exhaustive introduction of all of us, I would also like to share a few words about CATP Oswal ji. Sir has been practicing since 1978 and is founding partner of the firm fondly addressed as TP. Sir has extensive experience in advising national and multinational clients in areas of personal tax, transfer pricing, mergers and acquisition, in addition to the traditional areas. He has extensively advised a host of corporate and business houses engaged in the diverse range of businesses on cross-border transactions. He has been named as 11th in the top 50 tax professionals in the world for the year 6 and 7 by Tax Magazine, Business Magazine of UK. Under his dynamic leadership, his firm, TP Oswal and Associates, was rated as one of the best Tier 2 firms of India by World Tax Comprehensive Guide to the World's Leading Tax Firms for 9-10, and was also named amongst first 10 leading transfer pricing advisors in India. He is the ex-vice chairman of IFA Netherlands and ex-chairman of International Fiscal. We are really glad and fortunate that Ahmedabad branch of ICI has this wonderful panelists today. So taking the session ahead and without taking much time, I would now request Sunil Bhai to request the faculties to take the session ahead.
Thank you, Adlivan. We are very much excited, sir. And I would request Rasmin Bhai to take the forward.
Right. Good morning, friends. We have spent 21 minutes on introduction, etc. So
we are sorry for that.
No, that's okay. I straight away request Chairman Honorable Pramod Kumar ji to start the session. Sir, with your opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Rashmin Bhai. Good morning, friends. And thank you, Harit, Manish, Anjali, Sanjay, for very kind words. My gratitude to the ICAI Ahmedabad for inviting me today to be part of this very important brain trust session on what we have termed as global, as digital taxation. I'm privileged to be in the company of three very distinguished stalwarts in the international taxation. Rashmi Ranjan Das is one of the most outstanding visionaries in the IRS fraternity, and now one of the 25 international tax experts globally to be members of the United Nations International Tax Expert Committee. Rashmin Sanghvi, an icon of humility and wisdom, and a one-man think tank in international taxation, who has the capability of thinking decades ahead of his times. And for those of you who want to see how he could think ahead of the times, you have to just go to his website and see what is written and when is it written. And finally, Mr. Oswal, one of the most well-informed, most articulate, and perhaps most visible Indian face in the international taxation circles. For the last 2 decades, consistently, he has been sort of ambassador of India in the international taxation world. It is truly a privilege to be here. And I must compliment you, Harit, and your team to be able to get all these people together and be on this platform. What was said about me probably highlights the limitations of the digital world. When somebody said I had 18 years of experience, I was a little amazed because it's my 22nd year in the job. But that's what happens in the digital world. Whatever goes in remains there. Even 10 years from now, some website will continue to say that I have been a member of the tribunal for 18 years. I have written 10,000 judgments, which I completed in 2016. But be that as it may, the topic that has been given to this session is the brain trust on digital taxation. But if you really ask me, there is nothing like a digital taxation. It is taxation of digital economy. And what we intend to discuss now are the biggest challenges to the taxation of digital economy and how the global tax administration fraternity is working on a truly multilateral response to these challenges. And in case one can cajole Rashmi Ranjan Das to share some insights, share the inside stories as to what have been the insight of this work and how Indian contribution, which has gained its reputation globally for being leading voice of equity and justice in international tax policies, has contributed. I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that next, around 60, 70 minutes, that is the time you will complete before this brief and fascinating voyage that these distinguished panelists will take you on discovering the nuances of digital, of taxation of digital economy. You will feel well rewarded for spending this beautiful morning on discussing rather mundane subject like international taxation. Fasten your seatbelts and get ready for this voyage of discovery. As you may be aware, meeting challenges of the taxation of digital economies has been one of the, and perhaps the most important, issues in the BEPS project. The Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 proposals and the outcome of this ongoing work, that is broadly what we'll be discussing today. While Pillar 1 seeks to address the taxation of profits of global companies which are beneficiaries of an ecosystem provided by the market jurisdiction, and what is being sought to be taxed is something which could be loosely termed as a super profit, that is profit in excess of 10%. A specific formula has been worked out, and as we go along and these experts share with you greater insight, you will see the nuances of this formula. The threshold today is 20 billion euros of sales, but even this threshold cannot be static. Of course, there's some flexibility given in the initial announcement itself, which brings it down to 10 billion euros after some point of time. But even otherwise, there has to be an inherent flexibility on this. And one of the most important aspects of this Pillar 1 proposal, I would think, is group taxation, group assessment, group dispute resolution, taxation without PE, and above all, modifying the source rule, India's contribution to the international tax system. If you read the books written just about a couple of decades back, you will find a degree of sarcasm about the Indian source rule. But today, the global consensus is that this source rule needs to be adopted and in fact, improved and strengthened further. All along, so-called professors of international taxation criticized the Indian emphasis on the source rule because it was at variance with the international tax practices abroad or what was international tax consensus. Today, they have realized that the international tax practices abroad were unfair. They need to be modified in tune with, to a large extent, Indian conceptual support for the source rule. Pillar 2, on the other hand, talks about minimum level of tax, regardless of where the international corporations are headquartered. The concept of allocation of taxing rights have also changed very substantially, in as much as when someone does not levy that minimum level of tax, or as they call it, someone does not levy, the effective tax rate is lower than the minimum tax which has been agreed upon, then the other jurisdictions have the right to tax. So in plain words, the unused rights to tax get automatically shifted to other jurisdictions. And that's a huge, huge change. Of course, while Pillar 1 deals only with the automated digital services and consumer-facing businesses, Pillar 2 applies to all entities, excluding only specified entities. You will now hear from the experts, eminent experts, about the mechanism of these new proposals. But on a very personal note, when I think of these challenges to the taxation of digital economy, I realize that the way technology has changed our lives, and resultantly the way the technology has changed the business models, it's impossible for any legal framework, which is inherently static in nature, to keep pace with the same. The changes in the business models are so quick, so swift, and so rapid that international tax policies, which are based on international consensus rather than by sovereign acts, are inherently incapable to keep pace with the same. It's an uneven battle, and therefore it's a tough battle. It will also mean that there could be quick changes even in the approach. Over a period of time, we have seen that only our direction has been clear, but our focus kept on changing. We saw, for example, in Equalization Levy 1, how our concern of taxation was online advertising, how it has gone to online sales today. And of all you know, as Rashmin pointed out yesterday, how will it take shape in times to come? Will it be a concern for the use of artificial intelligence? Will it have application on things like an online 3D printing tomorrow? And what will be the possible ways in which the digital world will change the way we live? And for each such shift in focus, changes in approach will have to be made. It's only the object of taxing the digital economy which remains static. The mechanism will keep evolving. And therefore, calibration of the system will be an ongoing process. That's one aspect of the matter. The other aspect of the matter, and that's even more important, that's the basis of taxation. There was a time when taxes were seen as a compensation for the services rendered by the government. That was a typical colonial mindset. As governments became more responsive to society they serve, they have greater responsibility to preserve the ecosystem, which is conducive for growth. And the beneficiaries of that ecosystem, which include large businesses, have to pay for it. Therefore, we have seen that taxes are not only for rendition of services by the government, but also for providing an ecosystem, including markets, by the government, which essentially represent the society. And the businesses which benefit from these markets have to pay for using the benefits of that market, that ecosystem, and also to ensure that that ecosystem is nurtured, grown, and preserved. That is a huge paradigm shift. And as we will see in a short while, the law for the first time could probably have a provision for, rather than the emphasis on, rather than residence of capital, rather than economic activity leading to value creation, on the market of consumption being recognized as a conceptual justification for taxation. I think that's a huge, huge shift. Today, just because somebody gives market to the product, it has now been conceptually recognized that it could be justification for taxation. And third thing, which I think is very important, is the irrelevance of fictional independence of enterprise, whether it's hypothetical independence of PE or even legal independence of the group entities, because of the emphasis will be on the group profits now. That's an evolving situation. And that is one of the important features of the new approach. In the proposed taxation of digital economy, this approach can be seen in action. What we are discussing now is the taxation of digital economy, which are essentially in the nature of proposals and the process of development and law. But there's an inherent message which is clear for each one of us in this event. And the message is that the changing dynamism in the law-making process requires us to realize that any aggressive adventurism has become a thing of the past. We have to be clear that any planning based on the exploitation of loopholes based on the unjust provisions in a system has a very short lifespan now. As a matter of fact, our approach has to change. The way things are progressing, and if developments in Europe are any indication, giving right advice to the taxpayer is no longer a simple moral issue. It may even have legal ramifications. Therefore, all of us have to understand something simple. You have to be on the right side. You have to be on the right side of law. You cannot afford to be on the wrong side, even when you meet the letter, but you work against the spirit. This will not work. And your value as a professional today is not as a partner in crime, not as an instrument of hushing up something which has gone wrong, but as a visionary and approach, and as someone who could guide the businesses to grow and yet to be on the right side of law. So it's prosperity with ethics. And that is now inbuilt in all these provisions. A lot is said about the BEPS project, and they are concerned about the inequities in the international taxation. I, for one, take all this with a pinch of salt. The unfairness of the international tax system was perhaps so glaring that there was no choice but to deal with the same. If the international community was not to do it, unilateral measures would have been inevitable. Equalization levy and other digital taxes in many jurisdictions are glaring examples of this approach. It is therefore the compulsion and the choice of the international tax community, particularly the capital exporting countries, that they have to be more equitable in approach. Adam Smith, long back, almost 3 centuries ago, a little less than that in fact, said that it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. Of course, in my view, it's time for rewriting the tax rules. And it's time for rewriting the tax rules by impartial think tanks. People like visionaries like Mr. Rashmin Sanghvi, who could visualize equalization levy 20 years ago. Now, the development of the law is work of the independent scholars, as I said, think tanks like Mr. Sanghvi. But then it's their inertia today which is giving rise to a situation where tax administrators have to take the lead role. Ideas should flow from the scholars to the tax administration and not the other way around. But probably a lack of impartial forum which can balance the interests, which can develop the taxation policies which are sound on the first principles, has led to the situation. But then I wonder, as a member of the judiciary, what does all this mean to me? And how will it reflect in my performance, which could impact you? Be assured that judiciary's role is not that of an activist. The laws are implemented as they exist and not the law as they ought to be. Yet, with the increasing awareness about the inequity and injustice in the present system, with the fast flow of information in this world where information is literally flooded and no secrets are secret, there is a subliminal change in the value system of judiciary also. And unfortunately, it is the inconsistency in this subliminal change which is a subject matter of concern to all the stakeholders. It's a tough call. It's a tough balancing act for the tax judiciary as well. On one hand, they have to be responsive to the ground realities. And they have to imbibe the changing value system about what is okay and what is not okay on the larger social canvas. And on the other hand, they have to ensure certainty and majesty of law. When tax judiciary does not rise to the occasion, it is inevitable that some solutions will have to be found within the tax administration to make a workable dispute resolution system effective. When I look at the dispute redressal mechanism of Pillar 1 approach, probably I am less than satisfied, because this is a dispute redressal mechanism solution in which balancing of competing interest is being done by the tax administrators and not by the tax judiciary. That is the same emphasis in the entire BAPS project also. It certainly raises some warning signals about the tax judiciary being out of sync with the new world order in taxation, only at the cost of its finding lesser and lesser role in the new dispute redressal mechanism. Yet, tax judiciary has to live up to the legitimate expectations of all its stakeholders, including the taxpayers, and uphold the majesty of law in unambiguous manner. While tax judiciary must understand the bigger picture and keep that bigger picture in mind while interpreting the law, it cannot have a value system which is contrary to the core judicial value system of impartiality and neutrality. If there is one thing to which judiciary is accountable and which must be uppermost in their mind, that is the majesty of law. If law is wanting, improve the law. That is the job of the lawmakers. Tax judiciary cannot fill in for their inertia. But I'm sure with the growing changes in the way laws are being framed, and particularly the way the intergovernmental bodies have taken up the issues regarding the taxation of digital economy, I'm sure laws will not be wanting, and there will be happily and mercifully lesser and lesser scope of being in a value system for the judiciary. So with these preliminary remarks, I hand it back to the Brother Rashmin Sanghvi for carrying further. I'm sorry, Rashmin, apart from the 21 minutes which are already wasted, I probably took 10 minutes more, but I thought I'll just put my perspective. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, sir. Honorable Pramod Kumar ji, your 15 minutes talk gives us very clear idea of the broad global vision that you have. You have talked about the past. You have also shown the direction of the problems in the future. And one statement which you have made is very important, whether it is pillar 1, pillar 2, or whatever is the law proposed, we are offering a static solution for a dynamic problem. And this issue has been most highlighted by digital technology, because every year the technology is advancing very fast. With the advances in technology, the business models are changing. And with the changes in business models, immediately the tax law becomes outdated. On digital taxation, OECD has been discussing since 1997. It has completed 24 years of discussions, and yet it has not found solution. And whatever solution is being offered now will be outdated in 2 to 3 years. Then shall we have again another round of discussions? That is the issue which, sir, you have highlighted in one sentence, static solution for a dynamic problem. Thank you very much. Friends, participants to this conference, my task is a simple task. I am supposed to assume that participant does not know international taxation. And from that level, I have to tell you, take you up to pillar 1 and pillar 2. And that is what I propose to do in next 10 minutes. I have written a very brief paper, which is essentially a summary. That summary has been emailed to all the participants by the branch. I will try to complete this presentation as soon as possible. The query is, what is so unique about digital taxation? India has been amending its income tax law every year 10 times. We don't take so much time. 24 years is something unheard of. Why should digital taxation take 24 years? So please explain me what is so unique about it. And I'll try to do that. So first, going from a domestic tax to international taxation. That is the first thing let us understand. Domestic tax, we are all practicing. Okay. There, our client is Indian resident and the source of income is also within India. So the full income is taxable. We don't think about Section 1. Section 1 provides for the jurisdiction of Government of India to tax anybody. And the moment we pass our final CA exams, we forget about Section 1. Who looks at Section 1? And remember that the whole Vodafone case was fought on this. 11,000 crores of revenue was lost because the SSC succeeded in saying that India had no jurisdiction to tax Vodafone. So now understand how important Section 1 is. Similarly, Section 5, the scope of total income which is taxable in India, and Section 6, the residential status. Section 9, which makes deeming provisions to expand the scope of taxable income. Now, these are the sections which we ignore in our domestic taxation. So international taxation is essentially study of these 4 sections in depth, and then of course, study of double tax avoidance agreements. This is the only difference. Otherwise, there is no further difference. Now, in international taxation, I am going beyond the technical language of Income Tax Act and going into the language of double tax avoidance agreements, or in short, DTAs or treaties. For a government to tax the income of any person, a connecting factor is required. There are 2 terms used for it. You can use any term, connecting factor or nexus. The 2 connecting factors recognized are the residential status of the SSC, and second factor is the source of income. Now, both these factors have been in existence and accepted for last 100 years. There is nothing new about it, and I will not discuss these 2 concepts today. Now, digital technologies so fast evolved and they have made it possible for a business entity to do business in other countries without having a permanent establishment. What is a permanent establishment? Permanent establishment, we are restricting our discussions to Article 7, the business income for double tax avoidance agreements. Under Article 7, primarily, the country of residence has the right to tax global income of all the SSCs resident there. Okay. So this is the fundamental base with which we start. Why fundamental base of country of residence? That history I have given in my paper. I will not repeat right now. So COR, the country of residence, has a right to tax the global income. Now, what about country of source? Let us say there is an American automobile company and it has set up a factory in India. And that factory is producing cars and selling cars in India. Then it has got a permanent establishment in India. The country, India, now becomes country of source for that American entity. And India now has a right to tax the income of that automobile company, but only to the extent that the profits can be attributed to its permanent establishment in India. Now, this is one sentence I have said. It involves several concepts. The first is attribution of income. How do you attribute income to the Indian permanent establishment? Now, for that, the international community has developed transfer pricing rules. Under the transfer pricing rules, there is a concept of arm's length pricing. And we have briefly talked about arm's length pricing, and that concept is under challenge for a long period. It is being debated. Okay, so you have a permanent establishment which as per Article 5.1 is a fixed place of doing business. The American automobile company has got a factory or a shop, etc., which is a fixed place in India. Now, when Google sells its services to India, or Facebook and WhatsApp provide their services to India, where is their fixed place? They do not require their fixed place. And since they do not require their fixed place of business in India, India had no right to tax them. You imagine you have a client who has an income of 1 crore of rupees and he does not pay any tax to government of India. What will happen? 6 different agencies will be down into his office and he will be raided. Nobody can escape not paying tax in India. But here are digital corporations of the world who collect revenues of more than 10,000 crores per year, and they were not paying any tax in India. And they claimed it to be in keeping with the existing law. This is when the challenge to existing law arose. Government of India had appointed e-commerce committee in the year 1999. That committee presented a report and said that this concept of permanent establishment is outdated. It needs a review. At least permanent establishment can be applied to what is called the bricks and mortar business, but it cannot be applied to the digital business. At that time, we were using the terminology e-commerce. OECD has now changed the terminology to digital commerce. And as Pramod Kumarji has said, in 3 years' time, the business models will change, and they will be searching for some other name. Anyway, the e-commerce committee said this concept of PE needs a review. OECD rejected the statement because any change in the existing system of taxation would erode the tax base of G4. The G4, by G4, I mean USA, UK, France, and Germany, the 4 most influential countries in OECD. So in the year 2000, when India presented a report, this G4 felt that their own tax base will be eroded, their revenues will go down, so they did not accept to change concept of PE. OECD published a report in the year 2005 saying that the concept of PE is fine, international taxation rules are fine, and e-commerce business is not so big that it requires any change. Now, friends, can you bring philosophy into taxation? I think we can. And in philosophy, all of us are aware of the law of karma. Whatever I do, I will face the consequences. Okay. So the tables were turned. In 2007, 2008, American economy was into the dumps. People realized that USA was an insolvent country, and the global economies required change in economics also. So G20 was appointed. When several nations were deeply hurt by recession, that time Britain and France realized that while they were supporting several tax havens, their own tax revenues were going down. Google and Facebook had huge presence in Britain, but they were not paying any taxes to Britain. And British Parliament appointed a committee. That committee investigated the affairs. You should see the interviews of the committee with the finance executives of Facebook and Google. The way the finance executives were responding to the chairman of parliamentary committee, it is to be seen to believe it. Okay, so Britain decided we will not tolerate this, and OECD was not just moving further. OECD had no solution for digital taxation, so British government imposed Diverted Profits Tax Act. In this is what the chairman said was a unilateral tax measure. Britain was the first country to impose a unilateral tax. Again, what is the crux of the issue? The crux is that there were 2 connecting factors identified by international tax community. These 2 factors were not applicable to digital commerce, and hence people were in search of a 3rd factor. Ultimately, in 2013, at the instance of British and French governments, OECD plus G20 together appointed BEPS groups to study digital taxation and to offer a solution. It was expected to offer solution in the year 2014 itself. But even today, up to 2021, there is no final solution. Even whatever is before us today is only a proposal. It is not final. This is still a work in progress. So why? So understand that in case of digital corporations, there are only 2 countries which have the largest global corporations. The first is United States of America, second is China. And China is not too much bothered about taxation. It has got its attention elsewhere. So US government is the country of residence for all digital income. Rest of the world is country of source. Now, if the rules change from COR to COS, then USA would lose. And USA will never accept any proposal where US government or US economy has to suffer any loss. And that is the reason why the IRS officer, Mr. Robert, who was the leader of the negotiating team in BEPS program, he had decided that until the year 2020, USA will not allow BEPS to have any solution on digital taxation. Now, of course, he did not say that in 2013 or even 2015. In the year 2017, Mr. Roberts retired, and on retirement, he was giving interview to a tax journal. In that journal, he claimed credit that my success is I have not allowed BEPS group to offer any solution on digital taxation. So now you understand the problem. Where is the problem? The solution is easy. Solution could have been given in the year 99 or 2000, but solution was not allowed to take place by US government. What is the OECD's role? OECD's role is to offer a solution which is beneficial to USA and make the world believe that it is good for the whole world. Please understand what I am saying. If it to you, it looks like a very radical statement. I invite you to read my book on digital taxation. It is available on my website, free of charge. You can download and read. I have exposed all these institutions and all those factors which do not allow digital taxation solution to come about. Okay, so from domestic tax to international tax to digital taxation, the only problem about digital taxation was search for an appropriate connecting factor which gives countries of market the right to tax. Finally, on 1st July 2021, OECD has made a statement reiterating its earlier statements about Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, and they have accepted country of market having a jurisdiction to tax the revenue of non-residents. So today we have three connecting factors: country of residence, country of source, and country of market. With this, I will end my presentation, and I will request Sri Rasmi Ranjan Das, who has been the leader from India for negotiating at the BEPS group and making Indian suggestions about digital taxation system. But before I hand over, I will inform you that Chairman Sri Harit Dhariwal ji has said that we can extend the time by 15 minutes. So instead of 10:30, we will go on up to 10:45. The major thing for today is to understand what is Pillar 1, what is Pillar 2, what is the proposal for digital taxation. And this task, Sri Rasmi Ranjan Das will be doing. So Das sir, I will request you to take as much time as you require, and please explain to us Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rasminji. Pramod Kumar sir, Otswal ji, Harit ji, Anjali ji, Sunil ji, and other distinguished participants and guests. Let me express my sincere thanks to Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, Ahmedabad branch, for inviting me to this August gathering. It's really a privilege for me to share my views with such a distinguished audience, and an opportunity to learn from some distinguished panelists like Pramod Kumar ji, Otswal ji, Rasmin ji, and others who have been thought leaders in this process. Rasmin ji, particularly, as you were saying, the digital group that he was mentioning, which India established both in 1997 as well as in 2016, he was one of the most active participants in those groups, and his contribution was immense in those reports which India produced first 25 years back, and again bringing back equalization levy, which is something first time India did. In fact, he was referring to Robert Stack. Robert Stack recently spoke to me in some context, and in fact, he was saying that we were surprised the way India took up and came out with equalization levy hardly within few months, couple of months. I think the reports came in around October 15 and India was ready with equalization levy in February 2016. And India, both from the academic world, as Pramod Kumar sir was saying, the practitioners and Indian revenue have been the thought leaders in the process, but it is gradually a vindication of the stand, because all countries now realize the importance and the justification of what we have been saying. I think not only from 1999, in fact, I always refer to 1976, when India was one of the pioneering countries to usher in source-based taxation. Now, before I go into details of Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, as I have been asked to, I must clarify that the views expressed in this forum are my personal views and do not necessarily represent the views of the government of India. Now, as was being referred to by Rasminji, that the rules that govern allocation of taxing rights, which means who can tax, and also profit allocation, and how much can you tax, even if you have the taxing rights. So this allocation of taxing rights among countries in respect of income of cross-border operations, these were framed sometime in 1920s, and these are no longer fit for purpose in 21st century. As one commentator has said, most stuffs from 1920s sits in museum, except the international tax regime. The rest are in museum, but this is something which was still trying to find work within that system, which developed almost 100 years ago, and hardly by few countries. I think India was, of course, not participating in that discussion at that stage when these rules developed after the League of Nations took it up. I think you know all those. I don't want to go into details of the economist report, the 4 economist report, and the subsequent League of Nations discussions. But to anchor back the discussion, why we are looking at Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 is what have been already referred to by Rasminji, is that there are 2 fundamental problems in the existing rules. One is the nexus rule, that is who gets the taxing rights, which is anchored to physical presence, and a profit allocation rule, which I think Pramod Kumar sir was referring to, based on that hypothetical presumption of separate entity principle, even though they are on the same group, but many groups, independent entities are taxed on the basis of arm's length, which is essentially a separate entity principle, as if they are independent and separate from each other, which in reality they are not. And the synergy benefits that a group generates as a result gets captured only in the resident jurisdiction and not in the source jurisdiction or the market jurisdiction, as Mr. Rasminji was explaining. Now, the all-pervasive digitalization of the economy has rendered these rules, the nexus rules and the profit allocation rules, ineffective, if not completely obsolete. Businesses, as Rasminji was referring to Google-type businesses, they can be heavily involved in the economic life of a country. They can have customers, they can have revenue, they can sell their products and service their customers without a physical presence. As a result, the market of the source jurisdictions are losing out on taxing profits, which, that I always say, that which they would have taxed had digitalization not happened. So in a sense, what we are trying to do now, what we are trying to reform, is restoring those taxing rights which have been lost by the market jurisdiction because of digitalization. And the ALP, the arm's length principle, those of you who deal with transfer pricing will know. That principle has been the bedrock of allocation of taxing profits among the entities of the MNEs. But this ALP, I mean, honestly, I am quite agnostic about ALP. I feel it's not a very fair principle. But more important, once digitalization has taken place, the ALP fails to allocate fairly taxing profits among jurisdictions which host various parts of the MNE enterprise, particularly in respect of the digitalized business models which have scale without mass, in the sense they don't require huge tangible assets. They don't require manpower. I think if you get an opportunity, you can look at a very interesting paper in the Harvard Business Review, Death of Financial Accounting. That should be interesting for professionals like you. How, let us say, Facebook, which makes a loss, but its share goes up, and what is its market value to its tangible asset ratio, and compare that with a company like Walmart, where what is the ratio of its market value, market capitalization, and its tangible assets. In case of Facebook, the tangible assets to market capitalization is huge because its real assets are outside the books. The real assets of Facebook are its users. They are not there in the books. So there is a limitation to the financial accounts, the way we understand it, the way we write it. And the investors, so the stakeholders, they don't look at the financial accounts which shows a loss. They look at how many users have gone up in case of Facebook, and that is why they place a value. That is why they see the profit that it is going to make, which pure and simple reading of accounts of Facebook will not give you that perspective. Now, the BEPS 1, as Mr. Rasmin Singhvi was referring to, it did not address these problems comprehensively because there was an Action 1 report about the digitalized economy, how to have the address the problem of nexus, and also the Action 8 to 10 reports on transfer pricing, how to make it more appropriate and to take out the defects in the transfer pricing principles. But the limitation of BEPS 1 was that by its very nature, it was designed not to look at the fundamental issues like allocation of taxing rights. It was primarily designed to address concerns relating to base erosion and profit shifting, which was happening by taking advantage of the existing rules. So it was basically an exercise to plug loopholes. It was not an exercise to write new rules. And because of that, the way it delivered in October 2015, the 15 reports came out, countries were highly disappointed. I think Mr. Singh has referred to Britain coming out with EPT, Australia came out with MAL, multinational anti-avoidance law, we came out with equalization levy, and most countries followed with digital service taxes. That was a collective disapproval of what has happened in BEPS 1, or at best an indication or an expression of discontent that what has been delivered is not enough, neither for the governments nor for the civil society. I think, again, Rasminji was referring to the 2012 Public Accounts Committee discussion. Those videos are available on YouTube. Please have a look how the British MPs are grilling representatives of Google, Facebook, and Starbucks. Now, because of this disappointment, because of this discontentment, the countries within a year joined in Tokyo, Japan in 2016 and created what is now called an inclusive framework, which is now, as on date, has a membership of 139 jurisdictions. They are the countries or jurisdictions which have committed to implement the BEPS 1 outcomes like CBCR, like anti-abuse rules, PPT, and there should be no double non-taxation, etc. You know the common minimum things which have to be implemented by under the BEPS project. And it was decided then that, in fact, it was decided in 2015 itself that the things will be reviewed in 2020, which I think was Mr. Rasminji was referring to. But in 2016, the G20 mandated this inclusive framework that please come out a comprehensive solution by end of 2020. And in that pursuit, if you are interested, you can look at several papers have been released by the inclusive framework, which are published papers, and they're very interesting and thought-provoking papers. You start with 2018, the interim report, and then we have a policy note in 2019 January. Then we have a public consultation report in 2019 March. Then in May 2019, we have a work plan. Then another unified approach document and public consultation in October 19. Then a discussion and a public consultation report in December 19. And then two very good documents, if you have time to look at, Pillar 1 Blueprint and Pillar 2 Blueprint, published in October 19. And then a public consultation in 21 January. And finally, the Inclusive Framework Statement, which has been issued on 1st of July. Now, the final solution is expected to be within the indication, the outline that has been given in the statement in July, which is expected to be finalized by October 21. And there are some open issues which needs to be discussed and finalized by that time. Broadly, as I think Pramod Kumar Sahab also referred to, the solution is based on two main pillars. The pillar one, as it is described, it focuses on allocation of taxing rights and seeks to undertake a coherent and concurrent review of both the nexus and the profit allocation rules. And the pillar two focuses on remaining BEPS issues and seeks to develop rules that would provide jurisdictions with a right to tax back, where other jurisdictions which have the taxing rights do not exercise their primary taxing rights. Or the payment that I make, any country makes to another country, and that payment is not subject to effective taxation in the country where the recipient is located, then the source country develops, has the secondary taxing right to tax that payment. In effect, the pillar two tries to ensure that the large and profitable MNEs pay a certain minimum amount of tax. I'll broadly go through, because of the lack of time, I'll just touch upon certain points, and rather I will would like, if you have any questions, we can discuss that. On pillar one, its scope. Who are the companies will be in scope? The companies will be in scope which have a global threshold of 20 billion and a profitability of 10%. Certain industries like extractives and regulatory financial services, because of public finance regions, because where it is considered that the rent, the economic rent belongs to the country where these mines are there, and for the banks and all, because of the regulation they undergo on their capital and their profitability. So these are thought that there is no need for these profits to be shared with another country. The turnover threshold will be reduced to 10 billion after almost 7 years. And the nexus, as you have been discussed too, for out of this profit which exceeds 10%, certain part of the profit, which will be somewhere between 20 to 30%, which needs to be agreed by October, will be allocated to countries where there is, the MNE has certain level of sales, which will be around 1 million in respect of most countries, 1 million euro. And for smaller countries, it will be 250,000 euro if the GDP of that jurisdiction is less than 40 billion. Here, as you are referring to, the digitalization has rendered the physical nexus irrelevant. Here, the nexus will be established purely based on sales. It doesn't require a physical presence. It doesn't require anything. So sales becomes the indicator, and it is enough to establish a taxing rights for the jurisdiction and for getting that amount A, so far as these companies in scope are concerned. There are, of course, the elements like, because it is, as Pramod Kumarji was referring to, first time we'll have in the worldwide scale a taxation of a group, of its group profits, which will be, of course, based on its consolidated financial accounts. And therefore, the existing dispute resolution mechanism for allocation of this amount A, of this residual profit or super profits or not normal profits, whatever you call it, because that will get allocated among, say, for a company like Google, maybe around, say, 150 countries. For a company like Amazon, it may be 160, 170 countries. So the existing rules that we have dispute resolution, like, say, MAP or our domestic courts, that will not be able to answer these questions, which are essentially multilateral. Because if you imagine one country says it is, I want my amount A should be X plus 1, that one has to come from another 179 countries. Therefore, there has to be a separate multilateral dispute resolution panel. And that panel will consist of tax officials, maybe retired, maybe serving. And while I appreciate what Pramod Kumarji was saying about his disappointment that whether those panels will be effective, whether the officials will be able to take decisions, but I would like to look at these disputes in a different context. These disputes are about sharing allocation. What is MNE's major concern? A group's business, its concern primarily is that I have 100 rupees. Please distribute that 100 rupees the way you want, but don't end up distributing in a manner that the tax becomes, the profit becomes 105 or 110, so that I have to pay more tax than what profit I have made. So basically, it's a distribution. And who are the aggrieved parties here? So long as we distribute that 100, the aggrieved parties are basically tax administrations. That out of that 100, I should have got 7, but you have given me 5. I think MNE should not be bothered. So long as it is 5 or 7, total adds up to 100. But the tax administrations are bothered, because if you give me 5 instead of 7, then somebody has to give that 2. Somebody has taken that 2 from me. So it is basically primarily a dispute likely to be between tax administration. Therefore, maybe the tax officials should be able to resolve it. We can discuss later on if it's necessary this matter. Pillar 2, I think it consists of primarily a rule of income inclusion rule, which imposes a top-up tax on a parent entity in respect of low taxed income of its constituent entity. Let us say there is a parent entity A in country A. It has a wholly owned subsidiary B in country B, and the B has 100 rupee income. But as per, let us say, the agreed rules, the tax should be 15%. In that country B, the tax is, let us say, 5%. So on 100, the tax has been 5. So the country A, where the parent is located, gets the right now to tax the income of the entity B in country B by the amount that has been not taxed. So it can top it up by from 5 to 15. Let us say if the 15 is agreed to be the minimum tax rate, then 10 rupee tax can be collected by the country of A from the parent entity A in respect of the income of B, because it has suffered tax at 5% instead of 15%. So from a MNE perspective, it doesn't help now to locate an entity in a jurisdiction just for tax purposes, because even if it doesn't pay that tax in that jurisdiction, it will end up paying tax in its parent jurisdictions. And then, of course, there is a undertaxed payment rule which will operate. Suppose the country A doesn't impose that IRR. Suppose it is again a low tax jurisdiction. Suppose the parent entity is located in a low tax jurisdiction. Then what happens is that any income that is flowing through that B or A, the countries from which these companies are making business, they can tax to the extent of that 10 rupees under the undertaxed payment rule. They can have that rule. It is a backstop to income inclusion. Then, of course, we'll have a treaty-based subject to tax rule, which is very important for countries like us, for countries, developing countries, for source countries. That if I have given up a right in respect of taxation of a particular income, let us say capital gains. Now, let us say under the treaty, I have given up the right that capital gains will be taxed in the country where the alienator, that the person who has sold the asset, is resident. Now, suppose that country doesn't tax it, then automatically the country, other country to the treaty will have a right to tax that payment, that income, whether it is capital gains, which is to be agreed, or any service payment. Suppose I have made to another country, which has a base eroding effect on my business, because that is a deduction in India from the business, and that amount has been paid to another country. It is not taxed. So this amount, to that extent, it is not taxed appropriately. The rate is to be decided, because the gross rate tax will be a little less than the 15%. It will vary between 7 to 9%. And if it is not taxed, then I will be able to tax that payment or that income under that subject to tax rule. The global minimum tax rate is expected to be at least 15%, as the agreement is, and let us see what happens, but it will not be less than 15%. Now, I would like to conclude at this stage that just with a couple of comments, giving a broader perspective what we are looking at here. Now, the proposed this two-pillar solution, it is introducing significant changes to international tax rules. That is something we need to recognize. And as I think it is absolutely correct, as Pramod Kumar is saying, that we always try to have a static solution to a dynamic problem. But the changes that we are looking in international tax system, or what has happened over last 5 years, I think it is more than what has happened in last 50 years. And going forward, I am sure what the changes that will happen in international tax landscape over the next 5 years, it will outstrip the changes that have been introduced in the last 100 years. And that is the level of change we are now looking at or should be prepared for in international tax landscape. From Indian point of view, the principles underlying pillar 1, when I say India's point of view, it is a point of view not only of Indian revenue, but a point of view well articulated by our tax experts and scholars like Rasmin Singhvi and P.P. Oswal ji and many others, and of course by the Indian revenue, that there should be a greater share of profits for the markets. There should be a consideration of the demand side factors in profit allocation. Profit allocation so far is only on FAR, which are basically supply side functions, assets, and risk, not the sales or the system or the ecosystem which supports that business, as Pramod Kumar ji was saying. And second, the need to address the issue of cross-border profit shifting and a subject to tax rule, which will address our concern of treaty shopping, which we have faced in respect of a couple of treaties. All of you are aware. I don't want to go into that. Now, in pillar 2, one last thing I would like to say about the narrative. The narrative, how it is changing, and that is what was Pramod Kumar referring to. What will be the role of a professionals like you in the changing narratives? Now, the narrative initially in international tax landscape, when you designed double taxation avoidance agreement, was that to avoid double taxation, that it should not be taxed twice. The next we had the BEPS 1, where the narrative was that M&E need not be taxed twice, but we must also ensure that it is taxed at least once, so that we should avoid a double non-taxation of income as they were taking the benefits. Now with pillar 2, the emphasis is on having a minimum level of tax, ensuring a minimum level of tax. That is what the world is moving. That is where the narrative is moving. That is why the stakeholders are there, and international tax principles now are discussed on international tax discussion, which are normally used to be very boring and only left to the experts. Now they have been mainstreamed into the international discussion. If you have to look at a G20 communique, you have to look at a G7 communique. I think over the last 5 years, there is no G7, there is no G20 communique. They are the two most powerful political groups or economic groups in the world now, without a reference to change in rules for digitalization of economy. There will be at least 2 paragraphs in any communique that has been issued over the last 5 years. That is what the mainstreaming of the discussion. And therefore, as professionals, as Pramod Kumar is saying, we need to look at ensure not only to be abreast of what is happening, but also ensuring that the clients pay a tax which is payable by them. Not that they should overpay, but they should try to pay a certain level of tax which the law demands or the commands. And that is, and the days of looking at avenues how to reduce tax rates, how to reduce the overall incidence of tax is over. Because if you are particularly looking at the M&E groups, if your entity doesn't pay tax here, the group will pay elsewhere. And since this rule will become, the tax rates cannot be separate for the M&Es or for the domestic business, there will be, you can expect now going forward, which of course has been the policy of the government since 2015, that exemptions of income incentives will go away and only the tax rates will be moderate and low. So we are looking at a big transformational change in international tax system. What it will bring to us, so far the pillar 1 is concerned, I think once you have a system where a part of the profit, and these are companies which have huge profits. Now, I think in terms of, they are almost, most of these companies' profits exceeds GDPs of many countries combined, not only single countries. Now, once we have a share agreed upon based on sales in India, then you can expect that our shares, our profit tax base will definitely expand. Because going forward, as Indian economy grows and our purchasing power of our countrymen grows, only Indian sales as a share of world sales in most of these companies will only grow. I'll give an example. I'll not name the company, but this is a company where the phones most of us use these days. It's an American phone making company. Now its global turnover between say 2017 and 2020 grew by 7%, whereas its Indian turnover grew annually by 29%. So what I'm saying is that our share, Indian sales share and the global sales share in most of these companies will only go up. And therefore, we can only gain because being a huge consumer market in terms of pillar 1. In pillar 2, I expect that the pillar 2 will induce behavioral changes. You will not have normally a low tax jurisdiction now, because why it should have a 0 tax or a 5% tax when the balance 10% or 15%, as the case may be, will be taxed in the other country. So most likely the tax rates will go up and the MNEs will lose their interest in shifting only because of a tax rate or a favorable tax climate. And this is likely to increase the cost of cropping shifting, because now if you are shifting because it was a 0 tax, it makes sense. But if you are shifting because you get a advantage of 2, 3, 5%, it may not be worth it. So the tax base of most countries, particularly the developing countries, is likely to expand. In fact, OECD expects that the total revenue gain from pillar 2 will be around $150 billion US. And forget about OECD. If you look at even enterprises like BEPS Monitoring Group, which an NGO, many of you would have heard of it, or Tax Justice Network, all of them have commented on the pillar 1, pillar 2, and have said that pillar 2, the revenue of most of the developing countries will go up, and pillar 1, definitely the market countries will benefit. But end of the day, of course, this is a compromise solution. I think as Oswalji was referring to India, from India side, we gave a proposal of significant economic presence. It's part of our law. We wanted significant economic presence with a fractional apportionment to be there, but that agreement could not, there was no agreement on that proposal. But we have now where basic principles of what we are saying, of a market-based taxing rights, of a profit allocation based on sales, these have been accepted. Of course, it is, as I always say, it's only the beginning. And definitely we are in the right direction. Wise, it is quite right. As the Indian government said in its press release after the inclusive framework statement came out, that we look forward to having a higher profit allocation, which is to be decided under amount A, the pillar 1, and a wide subject to tax rule, which will give us protection and also a taxing rights in the case our TT partner doesn't tax those incomes at a particular level. I think I will stop here, and maybe Oswalji and others can comment, and Pramod Kumarji can also moderate what I have said. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Das sir. You have in a very short period covered all the issues which are important in pillar 1 and pillar 2. Now I am addressing the participants here. Friends, please understand that Mr. Das, Mr. Rashmiranjan Das, his colleague Mr. Chetan Rao, and a whole team of income tax commissioners, they are fighting in the BEPS group and even in earlier platforms for protecting Indian tax base. Now, for us, Indian tax base is an abstract term. But let me put it like this. An income tax commissioner fighting for India's tax revenue is as important as a military soldier fighting for India's land rights. Both are important and both deserve equal respect. Mr. Das, I know personally, and a whole series of commissioners who have been his predecessors, their knowledge of international taxation is extreme. They know far better than most tax professionals in the professional field, but they don't get so much publicity. It is good that Mr. Dhariwalji has invited professionals as well as revenue people, and then on top is their judiciary. So ultimately, Pramod Kumarji can give his final words. So this is a good combination. Thank you, Das sir. Again,
one quick comment can I make for...
please, sir, please.
One of the points which was made by Mr. Rashmiranjan Das was with regard to the dispute resolution being sorted out among the tax administrators themselves, because taxpayer has no concern with who gets how much money. Now, the point which I was making is, it's not a question of taxpayer paying or taxpayer not paying. Judiciary has nothing to do with the taxpayer. The question is equity and justice. And it's not a question of tax administrators not being able to do the job any better or less better. It's a question of their loyalties to the tax administration. My only point was that even when it's an adjudication about which jurisdiction should get how much, ideally, this adjudication is to be done by the people who are independent of the tax judiciary, of the tax administration. If nothing else, please take the retired people who have no loyalty to the existing administration and who rise to the larger causes. That was a short point I was making, and not for a minute did I suggest that the domestic tax judiciary should continue to have a role to play in the allocation of those revenues among the different states. I'm quite alive to the fact that so far as this aspect is concerned, domestic judiciaries are completely out of picture because this is not something to be dealt by a sovereign. That was my limited point. Over to you back, Mr. Sanghvi.
Das, sir, you would like to respond, sir?
No. Thank you, sir. I think that's what Pramod Kumar sir has said. It's quite valid. I think it's absolutely, he has made the absolute correct point. And we will, I think, there are some countries which still feel that there must be some tax independent experts. The only concern is, one is cost, because if you hire independent experts, outside experts, the costs are high. And because there are so many countries, 139 countries, which do not have enough revenue, whether they will be able to just, any such panel is always a costly affair. So if it is tax administration officials, naturally the governments will, there's no cost to the process, I think, so far as that is one part. The other part is having retired officials. I fully understand that is something perhaps is a feasibility. And I fully take what Pramod Kumar Sarji is saying. I mean, that is something valid because this system needs to operate, and it is quite reasonable to expect that existing tax officials may just simply continue the fight or continue to keep their stand, and they may not reach a resolution. So that is the very extremely valid point what Pramod Kumar Sarji made. Absolutely.
And Rashmi, now that you are in the part of the UN International Tax Expert Committee, you will see that sometimes it becomes a test of the vocal cords. There are some countries which are source countries which do not have the voice of their own. And therefore, they have to essentially depend upon an adjudicator who will have their concern in their mind and absolute commitment to the cause of the equity and justice.
Absolutely.
Ostwal ji, aap kuch kahenge?
Yeah. Thank you very much, the Ahmedabad Chartered Accountants branch of our institute, for giving me an opportunity. I was I patiently listened to the talks of our Vice President Pramod Kumar ji. Of course, Rashmi Ranjan Das ji, he has explained the concept so well. But there are some questions in the mind of the people. Possibly, I thought that I must raise those questions, and therefore possibly we'll get more clarification or some thought for clarification from Das ji. Is it the question which we are now talking about? After having heard you, I believe that possibly we are heading towards equity. The distribution, collection will take place at one place, and then it will be divided amongst the various countries based on the sales. And if that be the case, where the population is maximum, like India and China, they should get maximum. Like Indonesia, Brazil, India, China, smaller countries will get little less because they have less sales in that. However, sometimes there are direct sales and sometimes indirect sales. How would you capture that? That was the first question. For example, every Indian going to Singapore buys an Apple phone there because custom duties are lower there. How would you capture that? Because maximum sales is taking place. Singapore is not that jurisdiction where they will consume so many Apple phones. All phones come to India. So that be one issue. That will be one issue. And second issue will be how this profit which is allocated to respective jurisdictions will be taxed at what rate? Will it be taxed at normal corporate rate of tax which a non-resident suffers in the country, or will it be taxed at a 15%, or will it be taxed at a royalty rate as per our Indian regulation? So therefore, this will clarify this. If you clarify that it will really clarify in the minds of the people who are here to listen to you. Then I'll take up next question later.
Thank you, Oswalji. Coming to the first question about revenue. Yes, I think the countries which can grow, the economies which are emerging, which are growing, their possibility of getting more and more revenue as years progress is definitely there. Because let us say in terms of buying a phone or buying a computer or buying anything, buying a car, the other countries have reached a certain level, Europe and all. So there is a stability of their sales. They are not growing by leaps and bounds in compounding terms, which is growing in India naturally. I think the number of phones or anything that, any other product, even consuming advertisement also. So that will definitely be beneficial for developing countries going forward. But as of today, let us also acknowledge that while India is a big market, let us say, I can give an example of Google, for example. In respect of Google, let us say we may be hosting close to 12% around that of users of Google worldwide. But we hardly have the revenue of more around 1.5%, because it is not commensurate with the users, because our users do not have that capacity to pay in terms of advertising their products. Compared to, let us say, France or Britain, their user base may be low, but their contribution to Google revenue will be high. But only thing what we can say is that Google's revenue, or for that matter, forget about company's name, any company revenue in India will definitely grow year after year at a higher rate. So we will gain going forward. This is number one. Number two, as you said, how do we capture that revenue? The basic principle, I would like particularly the young chartered accountants who are there and who are interested to read this subject, go to the Pillar 1 blueprint, which has a full chapter on revenue sourcing. Now, the basic principle that underlies the revenue sourcing is that ultimately the sales, as you said, where the profit distribution will take place, will be based on the market where the ultimate consumer is, or where the service is finally consumed. Now, we have been discussing, since you gave an example of Apple, we have been discussing with Apple. I think the inclusive framework that there is a business advisory discussion takes place with major multinationals. Now, Apple says that I can identify where my phones are used on a regular basis. And based on that, I can apportion the sales to those countries. Whether that sale is really booked in that country or not, if the user, as you said, if somebody just goes and buys phones outside and comes back India, Apple will be identify and attribute that sales to India. Similarly, let us say Google. Air France pays advertisement for Delhi-Paris flight. But that advertisement is meant not only for the people in Paris who want to come to India, it is also meant for Indians who want to go to Paris. Now, if to the extent Indians are seeing that advertisement, real-time view, the Google will be able to allocate, it is required to allocate, not at its option. It is required to allocate that portion of the revenue based on the viewers in India. So the revenue that on the basis of which the profit will be allocated will not be strictly as they have been booked in various entities. It will be based on these principles, which will of course be audited and vetted by the lead tax administration of that country. And some country may also object that this rule has not been properly followed. That is where the dispute resolution mechanism.
Excellent, excellent. That is what a lot of people had that questions in their mind, so that I thought that I must ask you the question. And even for my own interest, because I am also a layman, you know, I must also understand. Now, the issue is there are some large companies. You are saying you are targeting only 100 companies of the major countries, which may include 1 or 2 from India and otherwise most of them from USA. Now, countries say in 2008, when the global crisis took place, I have an example before me, Citibank, the world's largest bank at that time, that reported biggest loss in USA, but the only profit they reported was from India. The only country having a profit was India. So therefore, global profit ultimately resulted into some allocation of profit. Now, if you say you will allocate that profit based on the total number of population, users, base, or whatever the criteria you create, the net profit will be very minuscule, the consolidated net profit, whereas country profit will be very high. India may get lower share of that profit. Will this be in addition to the tax levied on the local profit? Or will there be a set-off it should not so happen that Citibank pays tax twice in India. One is on their local profit, and thereafter second time allocation of the profit made on the, of course, financial services are excluded. I'm not giving Citibank as a proper example. Let us convert this example into an Amazon example. Amazon, your criteria are the profit must be the 20 billion turnover and profitability beyond 10%. The Amazon reports 8% profit. Whereas their whole of the profit from India is set off against the losses of the other countries. And therefore, the net profit is 8%. How would you segregate? Would you segregate the profits of Amazon, or would you take aggregate profit of the Amazon for the purpose of this taxation?
Thank you. That's a perfectly valid question. Let me first answer it conceptually. The pillar one, conceptually, is, if you look at it, we will be having the amount allocation as an overlay over the existing profit allocation books. So broadly, how the profit is allocated? Either we have a system where we have a PE or a subsidiary to whom we allocate profit on a basis, let us say, whether on in respect of multinational enterprises, there are a subsidiary or a PE, based on mostly transfer pricing principle on TNMM, whatever. What I was saying, SSCL, the profit is capped, and whatever is rest is kept by the resident country or wherever it flows, where the intangibles is there. So these routine profits, as you can call them, they will stay wherever they are. And then at the end, as you are saying, suppose my routine profit is 5, and in other places the routine profits are, let us say, 0 or -10. Then overall net level in one group, it may be a loss, which of course it will not come into the picture in respect of allocation. But suppose a group is there in case of a loss, but the turnover is more than 20 billion. Now, what the pillar one mandates is only allocation of profits. The losses are not getting allocated to market jurisdictions. So losses will not come to us. Whatever routine profit is there. If there is a profit in excess of 10%, we get. If there is no profit or there is loss, we don't get. In case of Amazon is a very peculiar example, as you said. But there is Amazon operates in a couple of segments. One is, of course, it's which we know it for it is the online sales segment, where the profitability is very low normally. But it has a highly profitable cloud computing segment, where its turnover is close to now 50-60 billion. Its profitability is close to 30%. In fact, cloud computing profits is more than 30% in most of these. There are 2-3 major players, whether it's Microsoft, Amazon, and I think others have also come in gradually, but these are the 2 major players in cloud computing. Now, under the pillar one, if a group is 20 billion and its profitability is more than 10%, then its state comes into, and there is no distinction between segmentation, because segmentation will create complications. So on that basis, it is allocated, right or wrong. But where there is a group like Amazon, where its profitability is less than 10%, but it has a segment, disclosed segment, which in itself qualifies as part of the pillar one. Let us say the segment is more than 20 billion, profitability is more than 10%. Then the segment will come into scope and that profit will be distributed. Yes, I forgot to answer the earlier question about tax rates. I think the understanding is that tax rates is something a sovereign function. So the countries will be free to tax at the rate as they choose, whatever amount they get.
So not at 15%, whatever the rate as per Indian.
There is no restriction at 15%, I think.
I understand. Now the question is, country like India, which promotes, and since it is a conference in Ahmedabad, I thought that GIFT City is the most appropriate example. The government of India is promoting GIFT City. Foreigners have, in fact, there's a huge rush of all foreign airlines, foreigners going to the GIFT City. We want to promote that, and there is a GST exemption, there is a tax exemption, all are going to be there. So how are you going to, any other country making payment to GIFT City, they will say it is not getting taxed in India, therefore we have a right to tax that. Will they get the taxing right? And therefore, what is the use of India's giving exemption to such places? The India also will say, no, we will like to tax it. So how it is going to work?
The first is that...
Now, there is example, I am particularly taking with reference to GIFT City example, but it applies to a number of jurisdictions where free trade zones are there. But GIFT City, everybody in Ahmedabad will understand quickly, and that's the reason.
Absolutely. I think one thing we need to look at is that the Pillar 2, if you are looking in the context of Pillar 2, it applies only in the context of a multinational group, which has a turnover threshold of, let us say, around 750 million euros. Therefore, a pure entity, domestic entity, or an entity which is not part of a group, which is coming under that, then the Pillar 2 will not apply in that case in any case. But as I said, it's an hypothetical situation, it's a developing situation. But while there are many such, what should I say, regimes which have been viewed and examined, including our GIFT City and others, under the article, under the Action 5, that harmful trade practices, tax practices, and all have been cleared. But there is a conscious decision that none of these regimes will be exempted. Having said that, the Pillar 2, there is another exemption which is coming, which is inbuilt, which is called a substance-based exemption in Pillar 2. Like, as I said, if you have income of 100, then depending on the tangible assets that is getting used and the number of employees that you have in your business, there will be a certain income which will be deemed to be derived from the tangible assets and income. And that income will not be subject to Pillar 2 or not be subject to low tax exemption. In the sense, a country can exempt, so let us say for a business which has 100 rupees invested in tangible assets and 500 rupees it pays out as payroll. And if we have a markup of, let us say, 10% on this, then say 60 rupees. So up to 60 rupee income in that business, even if it is taxed at a 0 rate, will not be subjected to tax at the other country because it is considered, because primarily the Pillar 2 is designed for tax havens. Sorry, sir.
Pramod Kumar ji, you were saying something.
Sir, did you say something?
No, sir, you may go ahead.
There was some problem. I lost the voice. I got it back.
Oh, sorry, sir. No, that's what I was saying is that Pillar 2 is designed only primarily to target tax havens, in a sense that where profits are booked without any activity, without any asset, without any payroll. I'll give you an example. Under the CBCR data that have been analyzed by OECD and a report published on 29th of July last month, the M&E profits are reported, 30% of the M&E group profits are reported in jurisdictions where the tax rate is less than, say, 5%. There, the employee to profit ratio, or rather profit to employee ratio, is more than $1.7 million, which means each employee generates a profit of 1.7 million. Whereas normally, in a normal tax jurisdiction where the tax rate is more than 20%, an employee generates hardly $300,000 of revenue. So, so the Pillar 2 will ensure that wherever such genuine activities are taking place, even if they are taxed at a lower rate or not taxed, they will not be captured under Pillar 2. Pillar 2 will capture where the return is somewhat quite excess of the assets and the employee that are there in that.
So therefore, the exceptions will go on increasing as and when they come to know the experience is gained. For example, we have mineral sectors, we have extraction sector, we have excluded the financial sector, and therefore similarly the substance-based SEZs, etc., also will get excluded from its application.
No, I think the extractives and the financial sectors are excluded only for the purpose of Pillar 1. Let us be clear on that allocation of taxing rights. There will be no amount allocation. It is because it is considered that the rent resource, your mines belong to the country where the mines is. So that is Pillar 1. There is no exemption in Pillar 2. In Pillar 2, possibly there may be exemption only for shipping industry. All businesses will be in scope, but while computing what is the low taxed income, there will be a carve out for income which are based on substance, based on a return which will be agreed on the basis of the assets and the payroll invested in that.
So therefore, we should not have any apprehension that our clients will go away. The clients in India will continue. They will be paying taxes on their permanent establishment in India, and that return will be required to be followed, will be filled up here. Only the question is their consolidated profits will be taxed in the headquarter company or determined in the headquarter country company. And then that profit will be allocated over number of jurisdictions based on the marketplace. And that in case dispute and differences are there, revenue officers by their MAP process involved will get resolved this problem. And therefore that will be additional allocation will come to the country, and that will be taxed here. And therefore you will get an additional job rather than saying that your job will go down. There's some in substance of this.
In any case, no client is going to leave Mr. T.P. Oswal.
No, I'm giving comfort to all my friends chartered accountants who are 301 registered participant here. And that is the reason I'm saying that.
But Rashmin, please correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that Pillar 2 will not apply to the exempt entities, and those exempt entities will have a definition which will keep changing from time to time. And therefore, there's an inherent flexibility about allowing the incentives which are not covered by harmful practices. Is that correct?
No, sir. Partially, let me, since when Pillar 2, the exemption is extremely limited. Most likely, the shipping industry will be out, given its nature. I'm talking the minimum tax, sir. Minimum tax will not apply to shipping industry because they are being tonnage tax is there most of the countries. There is some dispute going on, but that is only, there is no other exception except those, say, the international organizations or those will be out in terms of entity wise. Now the businesses, all businesses will be in scope, but while deciding how much is this is an entity-based calculation. So this is a jurisdiction-based calculation. Every country, whether the total income earned by that entity, subsidiary or P, whatever it is, whether it has been taxed at 15% or not. This is first point. Now, while deciding that, a certain part of the income which is attributable to assets, tangible assets and payroll at a markup there, a reasonable return on that will be excluded, so that whether or not that income is taxed or not taxed at the low rate, that portion of the income will not be liable to be taxed in the parent jurisdiction. It applies to all businesses. So then let us say what I'm saying is out of 100 income in a country which is not taxing it at all, zero tax, if the business is operating at a certain level of tangible assets and payroll, and then suppose its income is from that payroll and this, whatever return we decide, it will be between 7.5 to 10%, whatever is there in the Pillar 2 statement. Now, that amount will go out. Let us say it may be 25 rupees, 35 rupees, it will be carved out. So once it is carved out, only the income in excess of that carved out, which is attributed that you are having an unfair income, unfair return, which is not commensurate with the deployment of your assets or your payroll, that will be subjected to minimum rate of tax. So normally in a country like India, where the incentives are given based on the real economic activity, that you are having a factory, you are producing something, you have a payroll, they will not be covered because they will get that carve out straight away. And of course, our tax rate otherwise are quite decent. So I don't see any impact of Pillar 2 on Indian businesses or Indian tax policy as of yet.
That is the point I was making. If you look at the dynamics of how it is to be applied, then there will be, the kind of exclusions, and these exclusions will again not be static. Anyway, we are running.
Yeah.
Sir, the last question I would like to just put a proposition. Does this mean that your Pillar 1, Pillar 2 is an end of the tax havens in the world? So the tax haven should disappear now.
I hope so.
Then this is a big message to the chartered accountants in practice in Ahmedabad also.
I can give you an instance. I think already countries have moved up their tax rate. Gibraltar moved up its tax rate from 10 to 12.5%. And hopefully they said they will move it to 15%. Most countries will be forced to do it. I think otherwise it makes no sense for them to continue to be the tax havens.
Thank you, Mr. Das. Thank you, Ostwalji. I think we have crossed even the extended time. So I would now request that we end our session, and I request Sri Pramod Kumarji to give his concluding remarks, and then Mr. Dhariwal can take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rashmin Bhai. I know the participants are now waiting to hear a very distinguished friend of mine and my batchmate in the ITAT, Dr. Gupta. So I will not come in their way. But concluding the discussions that we had today, I must tell you that my feeling is that when you look at pillar 1 and pillar 2, it is not the solution probably. It is not even partial solution. It is only the direction rather than the journey which is now relevant. The basic question which has remained unanswered, and that question was, how does the PE go beyond the brick and mortar model, and how the physical and virtual presence be treated at par? Those are the aspects which are still left out. When you talk about the virtual presence, websites as PE, I remember when I wrote the Right Florist decision almost a decade ago. And as I was writing the decision, I was realizing how irrelevant is the PE definition today. And 10 years down the line, that is today, when I realize it is even more irrelevant, because there are so many things which are happening with the help of virtual presence. Today, these are the companies which are in the capital exporting countries, which have virtual presence here, and they are making money from our markets. I do not know when will the reverse journey take place, when our entrepreneurs will probably use the digital presence in those markets to capture the profits, and what will be the impact then. But that question still has remained unanswered. It's an unfinished agenda, and as Mr. Das very aptly put it, it's a work in progress which will remain work in progress for quite some time. There may be some flaws in the way the solution has been found, but they'll keep on improvising these solutions from time to time so as to make them more relevant. And even on capturing profits, now every profit is not in terms of the rupees and dollars. There are profits which are beyond these terms. For example, market shares. For example, as Mr. Das gave the example of the number of persons who are on a particular portal or a Facebook. Now, do we need to redefine the profit computing mechanism so as to capture these elements also? This is a journey. And this is a journey to handle these models, which are business models, which are extremely dynamic. And the time has come where the tax policies also have to be dynamic enough to keep pace with these changing business models. And the work that the Indian Tax Administration, and as a matter of fact, Global Tax Administration has done to address these issues, I think is laudable. It's a work in the right direction, but I think it's only a beginning of a long, long journey, and that journey has just begun. So in the times to come, we would probably find more interesting developments. We'll find developments on how to address these complex issues. And as someone said, I think Mr. Das said that, the models which were developed 100 years ago, everything which was developed 100 years ago is in the museum except for the tax laws. So now the tax laws also need to be changed. They have to be dynamic, they have to be improvised, or else they know what's the fate. We cannot keep on talking about what happened 4th century before Christ in the Kautilya times and how is it relevant today. The principles are relevant, the foundational things are relevant. These are as old as hills, but they continue to be as relevant as sunshine. But then our methodology has to change. And the message today, the direction in which we are going today is that how do we cope with these changing times? And I'm sure all of us will probably be we'll be interested in watching how these things unfold. So wish you all the very best, Mr. Rashmin Das, in your tenure in the UN, in the excellent work that in your leadership Indian Tax Administration is doing, and wish all the very best to these deliberations in the coming sessions. Thank you very much. And thank you so much once again.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much,
sir. Thank you so much, sir. I think I have no words to say, but I'll just express my gratitude. I think before I tell Anjali Ben to propose a vote of thanks, let us have a group photo, sir. Such esteemed dignitary that Ahmedabad branch platform we hardly see, and Rakesh sir has also joined us. So it will be an honor for us to have a group photo with all of you. Yes. I think it's a new world, new virtual world. So we'll have a virtual group photo. Shahzad bhai, if you can please click a virtual photo for all of us.
Clicked, sir. Clicked.
Okay. Thank you so much. Anjali Ben, if you can please now propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Chairman, sir. I think what an enriching discussion we had on a lovely Sunday morning. We have never seen such a discussion, and it is first time that we are fortunate that we have an enriching discussion at Ahmedabad branch of ICI. A wonderful kickstart by Pramod Kumar ji by rightly pointing that the topic is taxation of digital economies, pillar 1, pillar 2, how it's difficult for international taxation to keep pace with the changes in the business model. A very simple explanation of international taxation and digital taxation by Rashmi Sanghvi ji. The meaning, history, and importance of inclusive framework, pillar 1 and 2, and the vision of the transformational change in the international taxation in next 5 years was very clearly explained by Rasmin Das. And TP Oswal sir very rightly pointed how to decide the tax rates in international taxation, international transaction. No doubt, even if I'm not a tax person, still the kind of enriching discussion we had, it was a very fruitful discussion. We are thankful to each one of you for having this amazing discussion. Thank you so much, sir.